Joining me today is Zoa Bonafiglio. She is an educator, instructional designer, learning consultant, and you probably remember her from part one of this webinar series. So she is back here with us today to tell us a little bit more. Without further ado, Zoa, I will let you take over.
Great. Hi, everybody. How are you? Go ahead and in the chat, give us a hello. I'll start us off. Hello. I'm in Lansing, Michigan. So today we are picking up on part two, talking about pedagogical acumen and what that means for instructional design. I kind of want to go over the planning of these types of things and what I do, and I have a couple of resources to share with you. So when I was planning this, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much information I want to share. So at the end, we're going to have a chance to kind of open up the chat. So if you have things that you're still interested in or challenges, I'd like to bring those to the table so we can kind of talk about those and maybe plan on future things that you might want to see or hear, or any way that I can kind of help you out. So to begin, I'd like to kind of review what we did, what we talked about last time. And if you remember, we really were looking at the pedagogy. Well, actually, we were looking at kind of all of the OGs, pedagogy, andragogy, and tying it in with, what we were talking about with Acumen, like the theory and the application of the learning theories. We talked a lot about backwards design came up, different ways that we engage the content. I suggested that we always try to keep the learner at the center, and that's where everything sort of flows from. So we talked about design and development from an architect and contractor analogy, which isn't new. I think pretty much every speaker, every webinar or conference that you go to, at least somebody's using that analogy for what we do because it makes sense, right? I also brought to you a couple graphics that sort of lay out the process of, best practices for instructional design. We talked about the difference between design and development and where along this grid you would really be focusing on the design, the planning of the content, the identifying a learner need, and all of those things happen before you actually get to the development and when you sort of bring that person in. So were there any questions just to start off from the review that anyone had? I think I kind of gave a good overview. And remember, I'm pretty casual, so don't hesitate to jump in, raise your hand, put something in the chat. I'm not sure how many people are out there.
I don't think we have any questions yet.
Okay. Well, then I do. So we're going to have our first poll. And I'd like to know, which statement do you align with the most here?
All right, so that poll is up there on your screen. You can click right on it to answer. All right, we've got some answers coming in. It looks pretty evenly split so far. A little bit more weighted towards that first one. People are responsible for organizing and managing tasks, content, and development.
Yeah, I wasn't real sure where our participants would fall with this one because it's really kind of organization and job specific. So how your organization sort of manages this task of training. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of people, the majority of people, 58% anyhow, are definitely wearing many, many hats. We are all wearing many, many hats. So good. So one of the things that we're really focusing on this time, and the two things that I'll share with you, is sort of how I organize specific parts of the instructional design process. So when we think about content strategy and planning, of course, I'm going to continue to go back to the fact that we want to keep the learner at the center. So that need, that user need, is always going to guide, for me, where we take this content. To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to plan anything if the learner actually isn't kind of the force of why we do what we do. It's meant for them. There should be some sort of behavioral or some kind of understanding change at the end of that. And that needs to be identified based on who the user is. Otherwise, you're just sort of giving information to them. And we sort of talked about information dump, and I'm sure many of you out there are familiar with that term. So I thought this was a really neat graphic that I found on PictoChart. I don't know if anyone's used that. That's kind of a fun resource for making infographics and different things like that. So we have this whole blue side that's content design. And then we have this whole green side that's content planning. And in the middle, this is where these things sort of come together. So it's always interesting to me, and I'm sure some of you have had this experience when, instructional designers don't always have the pleasure of being considered the expert at the table. I think our industry still has a problem professionalizing what we do and being many times we're not even a voice at the table. And I know that was a source of frustration for some people that were in the last seminar or webinar. So it's really frustrating when somebody just comes to you maybe with a PowerPoint slide and says, hey, I want to turn this into a video to help teach X. Well, that's great if you want to do that. And if you're telling me I have to do that because you're my boss, I'm going to go ahead and do that. But I'm also hoping that we get to this point where we can be the voice at the table that says, well, we need to look at this a little bit deeper. Who's our user? What is it that they need to learn? Is it actually a training issue? Is it something that is training or professional development? And today we're going to talk about that a little bit with the case study that I have, which is more training centric versus professional development. And I see that there's a difference in those two things. So if we're just providing information, if we're providing training, if we're providing ongoing professional development, all of those things are going to be, designed, and the modality for that is going to be different. You're going to have a different content strategy for those things. So a video may or may not be the thing. A PowerPoint may or may not be the thing. And those need to be intentionally talked about. So this kind of helps us get to that phase. And these are things that you can certainly present to, management who's making decisions with how training gets done or how professional development gets done. And you begin to use those semantics, like that language. So they begin to understand, oh, we're talking about, providing information. We're talking about providing training because somebody just needs to know how to do a process for something. Or we're actually, creating some sort of course that has a vertical and horizontal kind of curriculum development to it to continue. And that's really relevant in things like management training, leadership training. It's not a one and done. It's not just information that you can go back on. It's something that you're continually growing on. So that design is going to take longer, and there's more pieces to the development, which means there's going to be more to the organizational process that needs to happen. So with this blue part, we're talking about, the user. So what does the learner need to know? In ADDIE, this is where you're, doing a needs analysis or something like that. You could do pre-assessments. You can interview individuals that have knowledge in this area already, or the skill set's already developed, and then talk to individuals where this is new and try to find where that gap is. Like, where is the need? Who are these people? What do they need? Where, what mastery level are they at? And from there, then you're going to kind of start to think about content ideation. And I'm going to, the two resources that I have will show you what I mean by content chunking. Some of you may have heard that term. This is not my original, thought process. I'd be rich if it were. So, we've mentioned backwards design, Wiggins. These are things that kind of come into play under the pedagogy of curriculum design. So if you have studied or if you're interested in studying curriculum development, I think that would be, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. That would be something that I would definitely recommend as you begin to build your pedagogical acumen as an instructional designer. Curriculum development from the world of academia and, statewide standards for K through 12, those don't have to stay in that camp. Like, that kind of knowledge is relevant for what we do. And many people who enter into instructional design with sort of a teaching or some kind of educational background are familiar with curriculum design, and you can apply that to how you engage and how you talk about and help others in the corporate world understand how to engage best practices for transfer of learning. Because ultimately, that's the goal, is to have some type of learning transfer to the learner or the end user, the associate, whatever you want to identify them as. They need to have some kind of new behavior, new knowledge that has to be done intentionally. Teachers in K through 12 know that. Individuals who focus on adult learning, specifically coming from academia, how you teach college students, that level of education, English learning, that kind of thing, adult learning is also very relevant for what we do in corporate with our associates. And there are many, many different camps that have theories and methods to kind of accomplish those things. And what's happening in the corporate realm with instructional design, I think they're really still trying to find their stance and what best practices means, and what instructional designers and what instructional e-developers actually need to bring to the table. Because right now, as we talked about last time, those job descriptions are all over the place, and they want you to do everything from project management, graphic design, video, recording, and none of that has anything to do with the actual learner. That's just the product that's going to be done at the end. And if that is our focus, the learner, that user need, is completely left in the dust, or we're engaging from an assumption perspective instead of an actual understanding perspective. So that's where kind of the content ideation comes in. You're going to have your content. Somebody's giving you some kind of content. Either they're giving you, I've received PowerPoints, I've received entire essays, things that look like books that need to be turned into some kind of training in some way. And you're really then just spending time with that content, coming up with ideas, thinking about how you're going to chunk out these ideas so that the learner can consume something in a way that makes sense. Like, you don't want them consuming things too fast, because they're just going to, regurgitate it out. It's not going to mean anything. If you pour too much content into an individual, it's just not even going to mix in there. Like, the brain is just going to be like, okay, I can only take in this much. I can't take anymore. And so you would need to know your learner to know how much back knowledge they have in this content, where they're coming from, to know how to chunk out that information and how to scope and sequence that. In curriculum development, this is what is called the vertical and horizontal curriculum planning. What do they need to know in first grade as just first graders, but then how does that content in first grade move up to second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, right? So the same thing is true for a job. A person comes in, their resume says they have this expertise and this background knowledge, or they don't. So how are you going to give them what they need right now? And then how are you going to move it along? Those training paths, which is very often what they're called within the learning management system world, those learning paths are really doing the same thing. Like, how are we feeding this content now and over a course of time to this learner to be efficient and effective in their jobs, which obviously is going to promote the company return in some fashion. So then we're thinking about content delivery. So we've identified our user, we've identified the content, how we're going to break it up, what's important, what isn't important. And now we need to figure out, well, how are we going to deliver this? So we've determined, that there's X content. We need to provide some information because there are a lot of people that don't have the background knowledge, just the theoretical background knowledge of what this thing is. We need to give them a chance to practice. We might need to give them some job aids, and we need to assess all of this in some way. Each one of those bullet points has any number of resources that you can go with, which then starts to get us into this green half of this Venn diagram in your process of design. So, what do they actually need to do, and how are you going to replicate that within some kind of environment, be it face-to-face, be it virtually, be it some kind of hybrid situation, distance learning, webinar, like how are you going to get them to have some kind of experience? And then you also need to always go back to the scopes and the benchmarks. Are you assuming that you're meeting your learner need, or do you know? And that's kind of an area where you're constantly going back and forth. It's not just, oh, we're going to check this, it's a checklist. We're constantly checking to make sure that what we're doing and what is happening is aligned with what we actually need the learner to do, which has been identified within the scope and sequence and benchmarking. And that kind of, once the whole program or project, course, module is complete, you put it out there, people are engaging with it, doesn't mean we're done. We still need to evaluate the program. Like, how is it working? Is it reaching the levels that we need it to reach? I mentioned here that the Kirkpatrick model is certainly one that I use to kind of be able to determine how effective this program is actually engaging the learner. Any questions yet?
No questions so far.
Okay. This is where I kind of go into teacher mode and I have like a lot to say. So I want to kind of tie this into the last time I sort of talked to you about, we're going to assume that we have this client who is opening up a peanut butter sandwich cafe, and they have managers that they're going to need to train. They have new associates for the sandwich line that they're going to need to train. And we need to determine, like, is this training or, like, where are we focusing this on? So right now, the need is a training course module that our CEO from this peanut butter sandwich cafe needs. And so this is definitely a training. They need to help their new line chefs or line assemblers come in and know how to work the line, how to clean the line, how to engage with customers. And so there's this need. But first, I want to ask you this question. Which statement do you align with the most?
All right, let me get my poll up. There we go. All right, so this is another poll, so you can go ahead and click right on your screen to answer it and let us know sort of which camp you fall in for these answers. All right, there is definitely a very clear winner to these answers. So I'm going to go ahead and I will share those results there.
Okay. So this doesn't surprise me too much. Like I said, curriculum development isn't something that is very often talked about. It's not something that you see a lot of webinars happening on. And within the corporate world, very often, and I am making a global general statement here, please tell me if I'm off my, I'm off in left field somehow, but I would venture to guess, in my experience, corporate pretty much is very interested in that end product. They have a timeline. They know that that something's happening that they don't want to happen, or that there's a new state standard that individuals have to become efficient in doing or certified in doing. So they just need this thing to happen so that group X can engage and they can check it off. That doesn't really need to involve any heavy duty curriculum development, right? That's that PowerPoint, let's get this thing done, or the state has sent you some information about, how to get licensed to be a realtor. And, there's a list of things that you need to take, and you need to do this type of thing. So when we think about curriculum and content and this idea of effective pedagogy, we talked about these 4 guiding questions, and I kind of want to show how these engage with this chart that I'm really kind of pushing between the content design and the content planning, and thinking about those 2 things as very intentional things that get done, and really thinking about how you will then take that and how you organize what you do and intentionally be able to sort of know that you've touched these things. And all of this, really, we're not even talking about e-development, right? These are things that the e-developer is going to have to, or the e-development phase is going to have to then do, right, using some kind of software tool. And that could be you, as many of you as the first poll, you're doing all of the stuff, right? You're doing all of the stuff. I've already mentioned that I am very privileged to have a group of e-developers who I do believe, I see Bill's here. I think Ben is here. We've got Colleen, who is doing all kinds of media stuff with some of our new products that we're doing where I work, and Andrew, I'm not sure if he made it or not. So I'm fortunate and very lucky and very privileged to have a system in play where I can focus on curriculum and content, working with subject matter experts, and really engaging my pedagogical acumen that I bring to the table, and working with those e-developers who use the tools and the software to kind of marry together what the vision is I have for this for the learning and for the learner to engage in. So it's very much a group collaborative process, because all of this is equally important. It all has to get done, and the more intentional, the more effective the pedagogy is going to be, the happier your end learner is going to be. So again, we have these purposes and goals that we need to think about with the curriculum. We have to think about, how do I want my learner to experience this thing? And, how is it aligned with the purposes and goals? Or, am I just, because that's fun, let's do a Jeopardy thing because it's fun. It is fun, but is it relevant? Is it going to align? I don't know. We need to ask questions about that. So these are all still very important questions to ask yourself while you're going through these processes. But I'm hoping that by thinking about the user need and making that intentional, and then asking yourself, why do I have 4 guiding? There's 3 guiding questions. Sorry, I took one of them out. So when you're thinking about these 3 questions, how do these different phases align with those? So with that, let's kind of jump into some different things that I use to do that, and how I engage that with our client who is opening up a peanut butter sandwich making store called PB&J Your Way. Our CEO is very excited about this. They happen to love PB&Js, always have, always will. So I've met with the client and determined that there's a need, and we're going to just focus on the training need at this perspective. So to do that, let me open this, and if this is something you're interested in, Stephanie will make this available to you.
Yeah, I will share download links to these resources in the recording email.
Okay. So the first thing that I do when I think about chunking information, these are templates that I have come up with, and I'm just sharing with you what I do. There are, if you just go to the Google, there are many people, and like I said, if you look at curriculum design, scoping and sequencing, again, isn't my original concept. Again, I'd be living in a mansion somewhere if I did. These have been around for decades and decades and decades. Since the beginning of teaching, we've had to organize how we teach in some fashion. So based on the different things that I've used over the 3 decades that I've been working in education, this is something that these are templates that I sort of have come up with, and I change them. I think every course, every situation is its own living, breathing kind of thing. And I think one of the biggest competencies that as instructional developer or designers and developers, we need to be flexible. Our learners all come to us as individuals and different. We need to figure out how to chunk and clump them up into groups and categories, just like we do our content, which means we're going to have to be flexible. So these things change. So you shouldn't feel like if this is something you're interested in, this is a guide. Make it work for you, right? Change it up. This I work in Word, so these things can be changed up. But the essentials are always going to be there. So when I have a scope and sequence, the very first thing I want to do is identify who all the players are. Right. And I have their information here readily available. So all I need to do is open up one document or any document that I happen to be in. I have that information at my hand. So if I need, if I'm working with benchmarks and I have a question about perhaps breaking up a benchmark into sub benchmarks, I know who I can talk to. Your subject matter experts, and I'm assuming from some of the polls that we've done that pretty much everyone knows what an SME is or a SME. These are individuals that have the content knowledge. They're experts in their field. These are people who, in this situation, the manager is very familiar with doing, working a fast food line or some kind of line where things are being processed and done. Like they've managed that, they understand that. Your chef certainly comes with expertise on the elements of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like their needs, their training needs would be different and probably more on the professional development end. And we're not talking about that part today. That's a whole nother seminar or two. Stephanie, we can talk about that later. So for this one, we are definitely talking about our learner who are probably high school students coming in part-time, trying to earn some money to buy a car or go off and do whatever. College students, trying to pay off those lovely student loan debts and just live their life, do whatever. These are the individuals that are going to come in. They're going to be working the line. We can make the assumption that they've come in and they've at least had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, unless there's some kind of allergy going on. Or they've certainly seen, peanut butter commercials. They've had experience with sandwiches in general. It doesn't have to be peanut butter and jelly, or putting some kind of food substance in between another substance, right? And that's kind of how we start to talk about the content. We need to break it down to, what it is instead of just saying sandwich. You need to know how to make a sandwich. Well, do they know what a sandwich is? So those are things that we would we would need to know, right? Those are things that by the time this content comes to us, one of the things that I would have asked the subject matter experts at the table is, have you, in your interview process, do you know all of these learners know what a sandwich is? If the answer is yes, then we know we don't have to teach about the concept of a sandwich. In the interview, have you asked them about their experiences working in a restaurant or of any type? Have they cooked things at home? Have they made their own sandwiches? How did that work out for you? Were there any accidents? Was it good? So those are things that I would have already asked the subject matter expert. Are those things laid out? I'm not going to assume. I'm going to ask the most basic questions that might seem completely obvious, but I want that knowledge at the table. This helps us then determine the purpose of the course and the objectives. So for this course, talk to my subject matter experts. I've asked them these questions, and we've determined that the goal of this course is to provide new sandwich line preps with a foundational overview of the process and application of sandwich line prep. Not necessarily how to make a sandwich, but what does it mean to make a sandwich in a line prep, in some kind of assembly line. And definitely adding this extra component to it, this extra soft skill need of customer product presentation, which is going to, blow up into other types of soft skills that we would need to consider. So it seems pretty straightforward at this point, right? Pretty easy. We have an objective. We want these line preps to be able to examine the procedures and processes in an effective way. We're going to assess them. They need to have a 95% accuracy. Most objectives need to have some kind of measurement piece to them. If it's not specifically stated, like the 95% here, the assumption that pretty much everyone agrees on is that means it's at 100%. Like you either know how to do this thing or you don't know how to do this thing. I provided them a little bit of room for growth. We're at a 95%. I'm not going to fire you. As long as you can reach that, I think you're going to grow and you're going to continue to prosper as a line prep within this business of PB&J Your Way. So we've identified the learner. We've identified this need, which will be they will be assessed, to determine the level of their background knowledge and how it is aligned with the procedures and processes that the CEO of PB&J Your Way has determined a peanut butter sandwich needs to be assembled and all the things that they're going to provide that can also go on that sandwich. That is all part of their marketing strategy. It would all be laid out within their job plan, their marketing strategy, and everything else. So we have our goals. I also love peanut butter and jelly sandwiches too. They are my favorite sandwich. So I've not laid out all the benchmarks. Like that's like a whole nother how to set up benchmarks is a thing in and of its own. You can certainly again go to Google and find out all sorts of things about benchmarking, from very heavy theoretical work to people out there just trying to figure out how to manage this kind of stuff. So when I create a benchmark, I usually start off with whatever the project is in some way. In this situation, it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it makes sense. It's PBJ. This is how I will then begin to project manage and think about, if I need to access something, how am I going to find it the easiest? And I need to have these identifier markers that attach to pretty much everything so that there's some consistency. This starts to get into that project management world, which earlier I said curriculum development is something that I would recommend digging a little bit into to get an understanding. Project management is another thing. Just raise of hand or in the chat, how many of you are also responsible for project management? I know at least 58% of you are, or 53%, whatever.
We've got hands going up so fast for that one.
Yeah. So then my next question is, how many of you are actually trained and certified in project management? I know some of you are. I'm sure some of you are. I have not taken that test yet.
All right. Well, we have one hand go up for that.
Okay. That is a whole thing. Like, you can get certified and continued certification in project management alone. So that tells me that is its own job, right? That is a job. that we as instructional designers, for the most part, are being asked to also wear that hat. This is where things are organized, your deadlines, all of that are managed, right? Like this is the global view of all of it. This is the contractor on site who knows everything about the architect, the schematics, where the tools are coming from, where the resources are coming from, when they're going to be on site and when they have to be on site, and they've organized all of that, right? This is a big job. I hope those people get paid a lot of money. But so we also very often are being tasked doing this. So what I did for my acumen within this instructional design world that I find myself in is I went out and found different resources on project management. There are different software programs out there that if your company is willing to purchase for you, Gantt charts, things like that, that can help you keep all of this stuff organized. I know Agile, all of that sort of hit on that. Addie tries to help with that. There are many resources out there. And again, I just sort of pulled from all of those and my own experiences as a teacher and lesson planning and how I sort of had to keep those things organized. So that's how I begin to, Monday is another good one. I know some people that use that. I haven't looked into it yet though. So I have a few benchmarks here just to sort of show you. So we have this first benchmark, which I've given it just the name PB&J-1. I've identified what it is. The learner will need to explain menu items in detail with 95% accuracy. If you don't know what the menu is, then how can you know what you're doing on the line? So we're going back. This is that backwards design. To make a sandwich, they need to know what goes on the sandwich and what this company provides, which means they need to know the menu, right? So I need to know that my learner knows the menu and I need to assess that. So part of that, I'm going to chunk it up even more, right? So we have on our menu, we have the customer can choose from different types of breads. They can choose from different types of spreads. And we're providing them a different opportunity for condiments they can put on. We have bananas, we have potato chips, we have bologna. Trust me, I know somebody that eats bologna and peanut butter sandwiches, love him dearly, but cannot try that one. So we have all these options. And so now I know that they know the menu, but I also need to know that they know the specifics of the menu. Again, keep working backwards, that backwards design concept. So now I've broken this one benchmark into 3 sub-benchmarks. We're talking about breads, spreads, and condiments. And within each of those, I could probably go a little bit further, but basically today I just kind of wanted you to get the concept of what we're doing here. Each of these are going to have their own different things that we work on within this dynamic of the content strategy and content planning, right? So now we're kind of starting to think about this content ideation thing and how we're chunking things out and how they're going to align with the different benchmarks, which is going to impact the delivery. And you'll see that here in a moment. So I also then broke it down. I have another benchmark where we need to identify sandwich station processes and items. So within the, we have the menu, we have customers coming in, and we have this line, like we have the breads, the peanut butter, the condiments, the cutting station at the end. They need to know how to use all of that, how to keep it clean, how to refill it. All of that has to happen. So again, backwards design, thinking about how the learner is going to engage with these things and what they're going to need to do, and how each one of those steps, I need to show them how to do that thing. So we have a bread selection. I need to know, I know that they know about breads now because we've touched on benchmark 1. So I know they know the difference between white bread, wheat bread, rye bread, and crackers, which is a whole different kind of bread. I need to know that they understand slicing options. Some people don't like peanut butter sandwiches with crust. Crust has to be sliced off. Some people like it cut straight. Some people like it on a diagonal. we're going to give our customers the choice. They can choose how they want their peanut butter and jelly sandwich sliced, because that's an important thing. If you're an avid peanut butter and jelly sandwich eater, that is important. So we need to know that they know how to do that, what the difference is between those things, and that they understand knife safety. Knife safety is going to be a big one, because that's for ocean. Everyone is going to have some different criteria that I might have to prove that I've taught and have systems in place for my employees to know how to handle that. And then, as you can see, we have how to assemble a sandwich, how to apply the customer service skills, and for interest, the CEO of this company decided that every single employee in the company should know the history of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So we're also going to touch on that. Which I'm not going to go into all of that for this, but this is how I would have a conversation with all of my stakeholders at any given process. Any questions so far? I feel like this time I'm doing a lot of talking.
I mean, I am still stuck on the bologna thing.
I know. I actually know two people that do that.
Actually, so let's see. Are we still supposed to be seeing page 1 of your scope of work template?
Oh, I'm moving on to page 2.
All right. Yeah, I think that's
unless
all.
there's any questions on page 1, I can go back.
No, I think we are good.
Okay. So here's where now we start to chunk out the content. And this is a scope and sequence. And for me, this works. But these headings will often change, like I said, flexibility. So I'm going to break this training, because this is training. It's going to be relatively linear. But within that linear, I might have different sections where they can make choices for their learning. This is definitely not going to be a sit down, watch a video, and then take a test kind of thing. We're going to make this engaging, because transfer of learning proves that is more effective. Oh, some people are only still seeing page 1.
I see page 1 and 2.
Interesting.
Maybe, do you want to try stopping your screen share and restarting it? It might have frozen.
Yeah.
This is the joys of Zoom.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I see something there. Okay. All right. Just let me know if I need to do that again. And that was easy enough. I could handle that. All right. So within the scope and sequence, we start chunking things out. And like I said, this is going to be a little bit linear of a training, because there's processes. But within the processes sections or units, we might be able to provide some engagement, which is going to lend itself really well for transfer of learning. The more engaged, the more relevant, as we talked about last time, the higher your return on investment with transfer of learning is going to be. So within the scope and sequence, we're going to have a unit called breads. That's going to meet benchmark 1, 1.1, and 1.2 at least. It's probably going to cover a few more. But within the unit titled breads, we're going to have the topics of types of breads, bread freshness, and bread storage. So these are going to be important. We're going to have different performance tasks. And here these are just some of the main ones, like activities, scenarios, simulations, interactive practice, animation video. So these are the deliverables that you have options for how to kind of engage somebody in a performance task. So for the unit on breads and these 3 topics, we're going to have an informational video. It's going to be kind of information about breads and whatnot. Not necessarily a tutorial, but more informational, short, sweet video on bread. We're going to give them a practice activity, identifying breads, based on the informational video that they just learned. We'll have a virtual assimilation practice, not assimilation, simulation, sorry. Practice where they will, perhaps have some sort of e-developed drag and drop or scenario situation where they have to make decisions and choose a bread and actually do something with it. So it's going to be more interactive, more gamified of a practice situation. We have a job aids throughout the restaurant for the learners at the different stations. So we need to teach those. As most teachers know, it's not best to just hang up all your posters for the year and assume the kids are going to pay attention to it. Same thing with a bulletin board or a job board for the different infographics or steps that you want them to use. If it's just there, it's not going to be used as much as if you actually teach that job aid and you show them how to use it, when to use it, and where it is. So we're going to have a tutorial on the job aid about breads, which is at the bread station within the line. So we'll be teaching that. We'll be showing it to them. They will be engaging with it, and then we'll have an assessment. This will be probably a combination of traditional multiple choice type things, but also scenario situation where they actually have to then mimic what they did within these other activities. An assessment, this is just an aside, an assessment should be aligned with what you've taught them and actually assess what you taught, not anything else. So I always try to make sure my assessments are very similar to the ways in which I've provided practice and information. And over here in my notes, I usually add things that are going to end up going on the scope of work, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. So obviously with this, there's a video, there's going to have to be a script. All of these things are going to have some kind of storyboard. Using the word storyboard very loosely to mean it's going to have to show the pieces and parts of that activity. So even a test needs to be storyboarded out so that you have identified like thresholds, questions, how the multiple choice is going to work. If there's scenarios in there, like you just need to lay out the schematic, right? So for me, a storyboard is a little bit of a schematic, and they look different based on what the actual deliverable is going to be. But I know that there are different storyboard webinars and people out there. I could certainly talk about storyboards also. So then as you see here, I don't really have any text. I'm just sort of showing you how then you would just add rows based on your benchmarks and what you need to do. Again, thinking about that content and ideas, ideating the different things that you need to have. For me, that very often is solo work at the beginning. I've already done a lot of collaborative work with my subject matter experts, my manager within our e-learning team, and different other content experts. So we've already sort of gone over the benchmarks and I have an idea. And usually during all of that time, I'm jotting down different notes as ideas pop into my head. This is very much solo, where I just kind of come up with the scope and sequence and then bring it to the table. And we have another ideation session where we, Zoa, this makes sense. Or, you know what, I don't think we even need that. Which then typically I'll go back to the benchmark and say, well, are you saying we don't need the benchmark? Or we need to have the learner engage with this benchmark in a different way. So, and those would be two different things. And we move on, and there might be different, this is kind of what I want it to look like. This is one of the virtual things or video that I want it to look like. This is a place where I can drop all of that information in. So it's all in one spot, the scope and sequence. If there are any PDFs or any links for ideas that I want to share with the developer, I put it all in here. So very often while I'm doing these things, I'm also researching anything I don't know, or if I don't know, that creative process, that creative flow, sometimes when you're in project management mode can get stifled. So I'm constantly going out trying to make sure that my own creative flow is still ignited. And, there are so many wonderful instructional designers and developers out there with so many great ideas. I just go out and start looking. When I'm watching TV and looking at commercials or how sitcoms are put together, I really pay attention to what they do. And that's where a lot of my ideas come from on how I want to engage the learner with the different units and things that I've chunked out. And I'll just jot those things down here. And I have another organizational thing. I have several folders where I have different information that I can pull on. So that's a scope and sequence. And again, it's a place where everything is chunked out vertically, horizontally, and each thing is determined that needs to happen. So from there, I need to have a scope of work because each one of these things requires a task, right? Somebody has to do the task. I'm not doing all of this. This is me just letting everybody know what needs to get done so the developer and, we can have this final product at the end for our customer. So I will move on to the scope of work because I see I am running out of time. All right. Again, this is something that very often gets presented to several people, and several people need to understand what's going on in this document, from your subject matter experts to your e-developers and anyone else along the road that's engaged in actually producing this final product. So again, I have my template with just all the basic information that pertains to this project, including the individuals with their contact information. Our goals and things are reiterated. The learner analysis is back in here. So we can all just, you're not seeing the new document.
Yeah, we're still seeing the old one. I was like, I don't see what she's pointing at.
We'll do it again.
I wanted everyone to know that we did practice switching the documents before this, and it was working fine. Absolutely fine in the practice.
Can you see a new one? It should be like a blank table.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so again, just all, your basic information. So it's all in one place. I only have to interact with, I don't need to open up anything I don't need to open up. So the scope of work now, and I'm not going to go back and forth because I think that's going to freeze up the thing. So essentially when I'm working, I have my scope of work open along with my scope and sequence, and I usually have the benchmarks ready to go in case I have a question. So within the scope and sequence, each one of those lines then, each one of those deliverables has tasks that need to go with it. And so my scope of work looks very similar to the scope of sequence, but my headings are different. So I have my section or my unit. Oops, I forgot to take some of this stuff off. So I'm going to have to update this for you, Stephanie, before this is from a different project that I was working on. But we have our deliverables again. We have our to-do. We have now who is being tasked with these things, like the actual person who's going to do it. And we have due dates. So within this one, we have, the unit introduction to breads. We had that animation that talks about types of breads. Well, it's an animation, so that's a video. It's going to need a script. Every script, so this script is types of breads, and I'm very intentional with how I ask everyone to name their files. So I would, however you do that within yours. Usually mine, again, will have that PB&J _ script or whatever video it is. I need somebody to write that script. I need reviewers. That script needs to be approved. However, your company leadership system needs that to happen. Those people need to be identified. And then every script, if it needs audio or has audio, it needs to be recorded. That recording needs to be reviewed and approved. And so I'm going to task, like maybe Zoa's going to write the script, and I'm going to have Stephanie and let me see, who's Amanda Bloom. I'm going to have you review the script because you're on my team. Stephanie, you're the leader of the team, so you need to provide approval. I'm going to have somebody record it and so forth and so on. And I'm actually identifying those people here and due dates that those need to happen on. And that just, so that's just for the script. Now we need to storyboard that script. So once the script is done, it can go off and be recorded. But before it's going to development, I need to storyboard this. And in my case, I'm storyboarding it for somebody else to be able to develop it. So my storyboards need to be pretty detailed with, like color scheme. We've already kind of come up with those things. But I need to be able to tell my story and what I need to happen to someone else via this graphic representation, right? So storyboarding might not be something that you'd see on your scope of work if you are the person writing the script and also creating the final video, and maybe it's even your voice that's being recorded and telling the story. So some of these may or may not be relevant. I personally, even if I am or when I was also developing the videos, I still had a storyboard to keep myself in check, and I'd rather storyboard something and share it with the leadership and whoever needs to approve it, because it's a lot easier to make changes on a storyboard than it is to make changes in something I've already created. So I typically, whether I'm wearing all the hats or not, will still do each one of these things, and I will have them approved and have a sign off that they've been approved, which just helps me down the road in my experiences. When things pop up, we can always go back and say, well, actually that was approved, but if you want to change it, we can change it, but it will impact the timeline, right? So that's all part of that project management, being able to justify when a timeline is changing for whatever reason. And then the video actually gets animated, and we have somebody's animating it. There's again reviews, approvals, and then it needs to be uploaded to the actual product or the LMS, or however it's being presented for the learner to engage on. And this goes on. So then that's a video, an infographic. We've determined that this one has a job aid, so we're going to make sure that if the job aid isn't created, we've created it, and somebody's going to have to do that. We have knowledge checks or assessments that need to happen, and again, determine that this one's not graded, it's just going to be practice, but somebody needs to write that content, it needs to be reviewed. And then we have different types of activities. You might have a virtual practice or a scenario practice. So, and it's all laid out within this scope of work based on who's going to do that task. All right, I'm going to go back to my other, to this. All right, so one of the things that I then do, whoops, I guess we didn't need to get right there. With all of these, and within the company I work with and design for, we use OneNote to then help people keep track of their to-do list. We actually, have like the little boxes where people can check whoever's task it is. You go in, and there's usually an explanation of what that task is, exactly what has to happen in steps. And so we try to keep things very organized and together. So with that, I'm hoping that there are questions out there. I know I am running into the end. But one of the things for poll 3 that I wanted to know is, if you were to fill in the blank, I wish I had more support and or resources to help me with what? Stephanie, if they can use the chat, or I don't know if you can raise your hand and put them on so that we can hear them talking. Whatever you think.
Go ahead and put those in the chat. This is your chance to complain, to rant, to share your struggles with us.
Yes, and trust me, I know I have definitely ranted myself, as Ben, Andrew, Bill, and Colleen, and Andy, if you're out there. I didn't give a call out to Andy this time, my partner in crime forever and forever. and for always. I certainly have bent his ear a time or two.
Yeah, I know. I mean, even just at, in my marketing department, we're always like, we wish we had more people to work on things. All right, so we've got one comment. How to show worth to stakeholders. That is such a big one. Proving the ROI of internal or external training. That is a good one. I think we are all, everybody faces that challenge. Do you have any?
Yes. So the ROI is something that I've been doing research on for a while. And one of the things that I've noticed becoming more popular, I've gotten different like notifications about ROI calculators and different things that people are developing. I would imagine with the AI stuff coming out now, people will begin to think about ROI from that perspective, or how to calculate that. That is a big piece. I know, and one of my frustrations is a lot of times corporations don't think about ROI from a training perspective and understand the literally billions of dollars that are wasted just with soft budget lines, right? Not taking into consideration how much time it takes a developer to create a video, and this is why I have all those checks in place and all those approvals. Everyone's approved everything, and then we get to that final the final reveal or showing of this thing, and somebody says, you know what, this thing has to change, and we have to have that conversation because everyone makes a salary, right? So changing that one thing, is it going to be a benefit to change it or not to change it, or how are we going to get that information out? Because these things haven't come up. We've provided opportunities for these things to come up. I'm not saying that we can't do it, but is it going to be worth the money? And you have to, very often they're not thinking about how, because the associates, we get paid regardless, right? You get paid for your 35 or however many hours a week you work. But when you break it down in a budget and a line item, that can become very expensive because it's not just changing everything. Most people that have worked with me know that word just, like put a quarter in the jar every time you use it, because nothing is ever just, right? Everything, as you see, the intentionality of everything is a domino effect. So one change could potentially, really impact the system. But I agree with you. I think that's something we don't talk enough about. And I don't see a whole lot of training or webinars or discussions on what that means from an instructional design perspective and how we can be a voice at the table to help bring that forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So a future webinar topic for us.
There we go.
Okay, so we are at time / a little bit over, but
sorry.
It happens.
Y'all know where to find me on LinkedIn too, so feel free.
Yes, absolutely. Connect with Zoa, and we'll be sharing the recording of this and links to those to the scope of work and the scope of sequence template that she shared. So we'll put those in the email with the recording. And thank you so much, Zoa, for sharing your time with us today. Thank you to our attendees for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you all on our next webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.